Climate change is a very serious issue. That is just a fact. Extreme weather events will become more frequent. Environmental conditions will become harsher and more volatile. Hard times lie ahead. We must work to minimize climate change. We must adapt to the inevitable challenges we will face. Climate change should never be dismissed as some concern for environmentalist hippies. Climate change should never be dismissed as some concern of young activists. Climate change is a very real threat. Climate change is a security threat. Climate change will make the international order increasingly unstable and chaotic. Climate change will apply significant economic, social, and political pressures to countries all over the world. This will result in a more unstable and dangerous political environment. Many natural resources will become more important than ever. Conflict will come to be increasingly likely. So climate change constitutes a very serious security risk. Climate change threatens to destabilize the international order and threaten our access to the resources we require. Climate change is also an economic threat. Climate change will create significant economic disruptions. Access to resources will come under growing pressure. Climate change will reduce the supply of some resources and demand greater amounts of others. This will have major economic implications, as will the significant costs associated with preparing for and cleaning up after extreme weather events. It is amusing to me that right-wing parties will pretend to have economic common sense. Then they will refuse to address climate change, an issue that will do huge damage to the economy. Climate change is not some hippie activist concern. Climate change is a very real economic and security threat. That needs to be understood and accepted. We need to seek to minimize climate change and prepare for it. We only account for a tiny percentage of carbon emissions, so why should we do anything? This is what some people will say. The reality is that many countries only account for a small percentage of carbon emissions, but combined, they account for a large amount of carbon emissions. If everyone accepted this logic, we would never address the issue, and so we must reject this indefensible logic, this desire to do nothing. The collective of individually inconsequential actors is the most consequential actor. This applies to voting, it applies to trade unions, it applies to warfare. A collective of individually inconsequential actors can be enormously consequential. And so we must act. We cannot save the world on our own, but we can do our bit. And we can refuse to buy into the bad reasoning that endangers the world and our prosperity. The idea that what we do does not matter. It does matter, because while we alone are inconsequential, we belong to a group that is collectively consequential. And so we must promote the reasoning that facilitates action, because action is what we need. We must seek to reduce our carbon emissions. That means investing in green infrastructure. Wind, solar, hydro, perhaps even nuclear. We should be open to everything. We cannot afford to be fussy. We need major changes to transportation. Encourage the use of electric vehicles. Increase the use of public transport. That is how we cut transport-related emissions. We must take action. It is amusing that many on the right downplay the threat posed by climate change. Yet they are obsessed with the immigration issue. They do not realize that climate change will create tens of millions of climate refugees. If you think immigration is an issue now, just wait until the climate crisis really kicks in. Things can get a hell of a lot worse. Funny that these people who complain about immigration have no interest in addressing the climate crisis that will give rise to an immigration crisis, the likes of which we have not seen. The climate crisis will supercharge the immigration issue. It will make it far worse. This is nothing compared to what can and will happen if climate change is not addressed. Entire regions will be rendered almost uninhabitable. So long as integration occurs and infrastructure can handle it, I do not have an issue with immigration. But the mass immigration that could be produced by climate change would be far beyond what can be successfully integrated and accommodated with existing infrastructure. This is just another political reality of climate change, and another reason why we really need to address it. It is easy to lose focus on the climate issue and stop paying attention. We must not make that mistake. We must not let this become yesterday's issue. We must not lose attention. We need a bold long-term strategy to address climate change, and we need to commit to it. A bipartisan, pragmatic, and bold strategy for addressing this major threat. That is what is required. Climate change is a fact. Lies from big money interests do not change that. We need bold action, and we need it immediately. Our security and our economic prosperity depends on it. New Zealand cannot solve this issue in its entirety, but we can be part of the solution, and we can push for action internationally. If we have any sense, that is what we must do.